Welcome to this explainer. Okay, think about modern Japan for a second. You probably picture neon-lit megacities, bullet trains, right? A culture that welcomes literally millions of tourists every single year. But how did it actually get there? Well, the 40,000-year story of Japan is essentially one of extreme, almost unbelievable whiplash.
I mean, it's a really stark paradox. How did a nation that strictly closed its borders for over 200 years become one of the most open, technologically advanced tourist hubs on Earth? It's wild to think about. But the welcoming Japan we know today spent over 2 centuries completely locking its doors to the outside world. Yet, it was exactly that isolation, and the violent shocks that eventually forced those doors open, that forged this hyper-developed superpower.
So to understand this wild transformation, we're going to explore 6 distinct eras today. We'll start with emperors, shoguns, and samurai, move into invasions, firearms, and unification, then look at the era of total isolation. From there, we'll hit black ships and modernization, the path to world war, and finally, rebuilding a modern superpower. Let's dive right in.
Okay, Section 1. Emperors, shoguns, and samurai, from Chinese influence to warrior rule.
So in its early days, Japan actually absorbed a massive amount of mainland Asian culture. Back in 552 AD, Buddhism arrived from Korea. By 645, they were literally modeling their entire government on the Chinese imperial court, eventually settling their capital in what is now Kyoto. But, here's the twist. The imperial court became so obsessed with its own elite drama and internal politics that they kind of completely neglected the rest of the country. And because of that, power slowly slipped away into the provinces, which gave rise to these fiercely powerful regional warrior clans.
Right, so by 1192, all of this decentralization reached a total breaking point. A warlord named Minamoto Yoritomo basically crushed his rivals and convinced the emperor to grant him a brand new title, shogun. And just like that, the samurai and their shogun seized the actual reins of power. It's crazy, but for the next 700 years, the emperor was effectively benched, just a figurehead, while military dictators actually ran the nation.
Moving on to Section 2, Invasions, Firearms, and Unification, the shocks of foreign influence.
Now, the mighty samurai were about to face some huge tests, but nature itself actually stepped in to protect Japan. In the 1200s, Kublai Khan launched 2 absolutely massive Mongol invasions. And incredibly, both times, sudden, violent typhoons swooped in and completely wiped out the invading fleets. The Japanese called these savior storms the kamikaze, or divine wind. But as you can imagine, surviving wasn't cheap. The immense cost of keeping up those defenses nearly bankrupted the shogunate. Unpaid samurai revolted, and the whole country spiraled into a chaotic, centuries-long civil war.
For centuries, Japanese warfare meant samurai swords, bows, regional alliances, and covert ninjas. But then, in 1543, a Portuguese trading ship accidentally blew off course and washed ashore. The locals called them the Black Ships, and this total accident sparked a massive paradigm shift. It introduced completely strange European muskets and Christianity into a violently fractured, warring Japan. 300,000. I really want you to think about that number. Within a mere 13 years of that Portuguese ship washing ashore, Japanese warlords were fielding over 300,000 firearms to gain tactical supremacy. It completely rewrote the rules of their civil war almost overnight.
So this chaotic era ultimately culminated in a ruthless 3-step power grab. First up, Oda Nobunaga used those new European muskets to crush his rivals. After his death, his loyal follower, who remarkably was a former peasant named Toyotomi Hideyoshi, took over and finished unifying the country. And finally, Tokugawa Ieyasu won the decisive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. This secured absolute control and ushered in the legendary Tokugawa Shogunate.
That brings us to Section 3, the era of total isolation. 268 years of uninterrupted peace.
With the nation finally unified, the new shogunate was terrified of foreign influence, especially the spread of Christianity. So they went to absolute extremes to maintain control. In 1639, they implemented sakoku. The country went on total lockdown. No one enters, no Japanese citizen leaves. They even banned the construction of ocean-going ships. Literally, the only exception was the Dutch, and they were strictly confined to a single, tiny artificial island off the coast of Nagasaki. Now, I know that sounds incredibly oppressive, right? But this closed-door policy actually accidentally gifted Japan something incredibly rare: over 2.5 centuries of uninterrupted peace. Because of this domestic stability, the population exploded, doubling to 30 million people. It was exactly this era of isolation that forged the iconic Japanese arts, culture, and traditions that the whole world is so obsessed with today.
On to Section 4, Black Ships and Modernization, the violent snap open.
Okay, so by the 1850s, the isolated shogunate was stagnating. And unfortunately for them, peaceful isolation couldn't last forever in a rapidly industrializing world. Reality arrived in 1853 in the form of U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry's heavily armed steamships. Unable to match Western firepower, the shogun reluctantly opened their ports. But this humiliation totally enraged regional samurai, triggering a civil war that finally toppled the shogun in 1868. The young Emperor Meiji took supreme power, moved the capital to Tokyo, and sparked a desperate, aggressive pivot toward Western modernization.
And Japan adapted at lightning speed, literally, a terrifying speed. To ensure they'd never be bullied again, the Meiji government hired Western advisors to build railways, lay telegraph lines, and create a universal education system. They lifted the ban on Christianity, and perhaps most shockingly, they completely dissolved the ancient samurai class, replacing them almost overnight with a massive Western-style conscripted standing army.
Section 5. The Path to World War. Imperial Expansion and Catastrophe. So, armed with this powerful new modern military, Japan decided to basically beat the Western colonial powers at their own game, and the expansion was ruthless. In 1895, they defeated China to annex Taiwan. In 1905, they completely stunned the globe by annihilating the Russian Navy. By 1910, they'd annexed Korea. But this unchecked militarism really alarmed the rest of the world. Facing harsh U.S. economic sanctions, Japan eventually allied with Germany and Italy, a path that culminated in their preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor in December 1941.
The resulting Pacific War was unimaginably brutal, and it ended in August 1945 when the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 100,000. That staggering number represents the lives lost in those 2 strikes alone. The absolute devastation finally forced Japan's total surrender, which Emperor Hirohito announced to a completely shocked nation over the radio.
Which brings us to Section 6, Rebuilding a Modern Superpower from Ashes to Electronics.
Following the most destructive conflict in human history, Japan did something incredible. They reinvented themselves yet again. Under Allied occupation, the country was democratized, they entirely dismantled their military, and Emperor Hirohito disavowed his divine status. The nation shifted its intense focus completely away from military conquest and expansion, and instead channeled all that fierce energy toward domestic economic development.
Through sheer tenacity and an incredible work ethic, the Japanese people rebuilt their shattered country into a hyper-modern economic titan. It's pretty amazing. By 1968, just over 2 decades after the war, they emerged as the second-largest capitalist economy in the world. They were dominating the globe, but this time not with warships. Instead, they became the undisputed global leaders in consumer electronics and automobiles.
So, we've seen a nation that absorbed mainland culture, locked itself in total isolation, violently snapped open to modernize, suffered complete devastation, and then rebuilt itself into a technological powerhouse. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this question. What does a nation defined by its historical ability to totally reinvent itself do next? How will Japan adapt to face the global challenges of tomorrow? Thanks for exploring this amazing history with me.